Here we are at Walmgate Bar in York, the only gate in the city, in fact in the whole of England, that still retains its original barbican. The rest were demolished in the 1800s. There you can see the barbican down there, this long tunnel, which was an important part of the defences of the city there. These big oak gates here, these ones date back to the 15th century, and the columns you see here are actually recycled Roman columns holding up this structure here, which is an Elizabethan gatehouse where the gatekeeper and his family would have lived. You can just make out one of the many cats of York up there. Lucky cats of York, of which there's about 23, I believe, at the moment. As you walk through the structure here, you can see the spikes of the portcullis there, weighing about half a ton, which would drop down to defend the gateway, and there would have been gates at the far end as well. So you would have to break through the gates at the far end, and then you're all packed in, your army, in this section here, trapped between the two walls, with soldiers on top, either side, throwing down heavy stones and boiling liquid on you. Sometimes oil, sometimes urine, and other things too. Very nasty things thrown down on you. And if you manage to make it through this area, which is known as a killing field, you'd basically find yourself here having to get through this heavy gate. If you finally got through that gate, then of course you still have to get through these gates here, and finally getting through those gates, you find yourself in the city of York, facing a whole army of soldiers who've had time to get here whilst you were fighting your way into the city. That's the plan anyway. So very effective defence. So here we are, this is Fishergate Bar, the smallest gateway into the city of York, and the most recent. There was a gate here in the 1300s, but the current one dates to the 1400s. As you can see, it's pretty small compared to the other gateways. Still would have had a gate dropping down here though. In 1489, there was a massive riot against taxation. Henry VII had increased taxes. This was very unpopular, of course, and so people rebelled. They sent the Earl of Northumberland, Henry Percy, here, but he was actually attacked and ripped apart by the mob. And the Percy family don't tend to have done very well in York, to be honest. This Henry Percy, not to be confused with the Henry Percy who got his head placed on Micklegate Bar, Henry Hotspur, or to be confused with Sir Thomas Percy, who also got his head placed on a spike on Micklegate Bar. So basically, yeah, the Percy family didn't do very well in York. In fact, one of them actually joined up with Guy Fawkes to try and blow up the House of Parliament. Again, it didn't go very well for him either, so there we go. And then this gateway was bricked up for quite a long time, got called Nout Gate, because Nout could go in and Nout could go out. And this would have been the gateway that animals were brought into the city from. Outside would have been the cattle markets, and they were brought in through this gateway and then taken into the city to be slaughtered on the shambles. The Phoenix Inn here is one of the last inns that would have actually served the cattle market back in the day, before eventually, of course, it all closed down. So just heading into the city itself, I'm going to say hello to one of my favourite fellows, one of York's most famous residents, former residents I should say. Here we are in St George's Churchyard. As you can see, most of the gravestones now are just laid flat, and no one's been buried here for a very long time. But there is one gravestone just ahead of us, still standing. Little path leading to it, very well worn path. This is quite a famous resident here. It says John Palmer, otherwise Dick Turpin, the notorious highwayman and horse stealer, executed at Tyburn April 7th 1739 and buried in St George's Churchyard. So this is the last resting place of Dick Turpin, who I've mentioned quite a few times in previous videos, and this is where he lies, although it may not be quite that simple. After his execution, he'd been placed on display with people paying money to see his body. Then he was buried, then dug up by body snatchers and sold to a surgeon and then eventually reburied here, but he was buried in quicklime, so we don't know how much of him actually got buried down here. One thing we do know for certain is he wasn't buried with his horse Black Bess, as Black Bess was just a myth. The Victorians much romanticised Dick Turpin, but he was actually a notorious criminal back in the day, a very vicious, brutal man. Later on, they smoothed out some of the rough edges in the storyline of the book, Rookwood, and made him out to be a gallant gentleman of the road. A little bit more information about Dick Turpin here if you do come to York, have a quick look. Ahead of us is Fishergate Poston Tower. Poston comes from the same Latin root word as posterior. It's basically the rear entrance to the city. You can see the walls that lead down here. We're talking of rear entrances. On the side of the tower there's a bit projecting out, and that is a garderobe. It's a medieval toilet chute. So basically any toilet doings would go out the hole at the bottom here and fall straight down. But where we are now was a moat around the castle leading to the King's Fish Pool, which was a huge lake, man-made lake created during the time of William the Conqueror. So all would have gone into the water supply